Well, hey everyone, I'm Jason Knott. I'm the pastor at First Dunedin, and we are in the middle of our sermon series called Reset. And each week, we as a community are coming together to practice a spiritual discipline of some kind. And so the spiritual discipline that we're practicing this week is the discipline of empathy, which doesn't seem like a traditional form of spiritual discipline or a traditional spiritual practice. However, it's so instrumental to our faith, our Christian faith. And so to help us out on this conversation, I was going to bring on one of my good friends, Jennifer Potter Buff, who is she's an elder in the United Methodist Church. She's currently serving as a chaplain at Tampa General Hospital. And so we're just so grateful to have her on and share some of her wisdom of, what she does and how empathy plays a role in her ministry. And so let's say hi to our friend here. Hey, Jennifer.
Hi, Jason.
So you are currently serving as a chaplain. So tell me a little bit. How does empathy fit into that role as a chaplain?
I think empathy is what I do all day, every day, or at least attempt to do all day, every day. I don't do it perfectly all the time. I think it's something that we cultivate and pay attention to. But I think the work of being a chaplain is sitting with people in their dark places and hearing their stories and finding a way to love them in the midst of whatever the darkness is in their lives. So I think empathy is absolutely integral to the work I do.
Yeah. So you said like one of those things is sitting with people in those dark places, those hard places, those trying times, especially in the hospital, right? So I think sometimes we get empathy and sympathy a little bit confused. And so could you just tease out just really quickly, maybe what's the difference between those, the similarities?
Yeah.
How is empathy a little bit different?
So I think I tend to think about sympathy more like an expression of sorrow or maybe even like pity or sadness for somebody else. And empathy is this attempt to like put yourself in somebody else's shoes, to understand what they're feeling. When I did my first unit of hospital chaplaincy when I was in seminary, my educator felt really strongly that that empathy wasn't even really what we were supposed to do, but that we were supposed to do something that looked more like compassion. Compassion is like, if you look at the Latin words that make it up, it means to suffer with. Right? My educator used to say, like, we can't perfectly know what somebody else is feeling, but we can suffer with them. We can sit in the darkness with them. We can walk alongside of them. And I think that's a really helpful way to kind of hold together with empathy, right? That our job as followers of Jesus is to understand that that we need others in our lives, and we need to do some work around listening and being patient and allowing ourselves to be fully present with other people. We're never going to fully experience exactly what somebody else is experiencing, but we can sit with them. We can be alongside of them, and we can feel something besides just pity. We can hold hope and light and darkness with people. We can sit on the ash heap with people like Job's friends kind of did. We can do that kind of work, and I think it's more rich and more full than just having sympathy, just having sorrow for somebody else's difficult places, but to enter into it with them.
Yeah. And I like what you said about holding not only that sorrow or that pain, but also holding that hope with them.
Yeah.
And especially, in those hard times too, where, that's also what we, sometimes that's what we need somebody else to do, is just to know that we're not alone. I mean, that's a work of empathy, sitting with somebody, but then holding that hope with them. I think that's good. That's good.
And there's this idea in Celtic theology too of, it's called thin places, right? those places in life where kind of that veil between heaven and earth gets really, really thin, and you can kind of see the holiness, you can see the mystery. And I think that's the privilege of entering into dark places with other people, is that when I'm at the hospital, oftentimes people will say to me, "Oh, you have such a hard job. It must be so sad." And yeah, some days it is hard and sad, but it's also really holy, because all the like junk kind of falls away and you get to see what really matters. And I think you can do that work in regular life too. You don't just have to work in a hospital to do that and to be that. It's just about having real relationships with the people in your life. And you can find those moments where the barriers kind of slip away and you get to experience the real presence and real mystery of the Spirit.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think Jesus modeled empathy really well. You know, in our Christian tradition, empathy isn't something that we typically think of as something that we should like practice spiritually. And so I was wondering, you know, how do you see the work of empathy tying into our Christian tradition? I mean, how did Jesus model that? And yeah.
I had never thought about empathy being a spiritual practice, but I'm totally captivated by that idea. I think it's spot on, because I think we're all capable of empathy, right? We're all created in the image of God, but we're also human. And so sometimes it's hard to feel compassion for other people. Sometimes it's hard to feel compassion to ourselves or towards ourselves. But I think that's what Jesus models for us over and over again. Right? Jesus sits with the woman at the well and he says, "You seem lonely." Maybe he doesn't say that with his words, but that's what he does with his physical presence with her and this conversation. Jesus calls the little children to himself. He sees them. He knows them. He lets them. I imagine him letting the little kids touch his face and his beard, and right, like what does every kid do when they sit on somebody's lap? But Jesus embodies this suffering with, this being present with. And so I think it's absolutely the call of discipleship to learn how to do that work. And I do think it is a practice. It's not something we get right all the time, but it's something we can grow in and develop. It can kind of become this muscle memory. But I think it's essential to who we are as Christians.
Yeah. And I remember when we were in school together, we went to Duke together, by the way, for listeners. I think really a big idea for me was understanding the work that Jesus did on the cross as an act of empathy. It wasn't just like, I'd kind of always thought of it as like this thing that Jesus did like for us. But really shifting that as like this was an act that he did with us, also
yeah, I
for
think that's
us,
right.
But
Yeah.
Okay, so how does along those lines, like we're thinking about empathy as maybe something that like we do for somebody, like, you know, somebody's going through a hard time. They're feeling oppressed or beaten down or whatever it is, and we come alongside of them. So it's something that we do for them, but also maybe to ask you, I mean, this is what you do, as you said, all day, every day. How does practicing empathy also transform us, and how does that change us from the inside and change our relationship with other people?
Yeah, I think those prepositions are so important, right? We do think about empathy for, but I think when we can change it to empathy with and presence with and suffering with, right, then it's not just about this like power dynamic of like, I've got it together and I'm coming down to help you who's broken, but rather saying like, we're all broken, and your brokenness might be particularly evident right now, but I'm broken too. But because I'm broken, I know what it is to be broken, and I can sit with you in this messy, dark place, and I can know there's hope on the other side of it. And you might not need to hear me say like everything's going to be fine, In fact, you probably don't need me to say that. But when you start to put together, like, I've lost somebody I love, but I also had the gift of that person in my life, right? Then you can sit alongside of them and say, tell me more. Tell me about this loved one. What are some of the things that your loved one was most proud of? What are some of the things that, what's the legacy that's left? How are you going to carry on their character and their purpose and their love in the world? And I think doing that work of realizing we're all human, and we all have a story that we hold, and we all have these particular heartaches and these particular joys, and that's part of what it's part of what we need in community. We need people who've done the broken work, and we need people who've done the celebratory work, because it's always transformative to hear another person's story. It teaches us something about ourselves, and it teaches us something about who and what God is. This relationship we have with God is this kind of vertical up and down, but it's not complete if we don't have the side to side with the world around us, both other humans and like creation at large. And I think one of the most important ways we're transformed as followers of Jesus is hearing other people's stories and understanding that our view of the world is not the only view of the world, and our view of God is not the only view of God. And that if we'll stop long enough to listen, our view widens and expands, and it's richer, and I think also freeing, because we don't have to have it all together, because the person sitting next to us is there with us.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, there's just like so much that I want to dig in to everything that you just said, because it was so good. But just one thing that kind of had my mind start going, and I'm sure you deal with this a lot as a chaplain. I deal with it a lot as a pastor. Is as you were saying, empathy or this trying to show compassion to people. It's really this deep, hard work, and sometimes it's uncomfortable, and it's really hard to do. And so I think sometimes we try to get by, or we don't know what to say, and so we find ourselves saying some of these cliche things, or just like a thin sense of hope of like it'll all work out, it'll all be fine, and as you said, sometimes that's not what we need to hear in this moment. And so, yeah, I just really appreciate, like, I think you're showing too that empathy is, it's something so much deeper. And that's also part of us growing too, is to be able to not just pass over these things lightly, or just kind of push them away, or give a false sense of like this, pat them on the head. And, it's,
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think too, one of the things I've learned, so I've been at Tampa General for almost a year now. I'm like 2 weeks shy of a year. Almost always the right answer in the hardest moments is not words. It's just being present. When I'm the most uncomfortable, those are the times that I most want to put words to it, but that's about me, not about the other person. And so one of the tools that I've developed is to say over and over again in my head when it gets so hard and so painful is just bear witness, just bear witness. And it's a reminder to myself that my job is not to fix it. My job is just to be alongside of them in their story. And I think that applies to other places in our lives too. Our job is just to be with people in those hard moments. Nothing we say is going to fix it. And so it's probably better that we keep our mouth shut and we just pay attention. We just sit in the messiness with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's hard. That's uncomfortable.
It's so hard. It's so hard. There's times I want to go running from the room. It's so hard. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we're talking about this a little bit already. What would you say, like, somebody, what are some, like, just practical ways that maybe we could begin to develop empathy and begin to practice it, I mean, it's a journey, right?
For
I mean, that's
sure.
what all these things are. And we need self-awareness and all that stuff. But maybe could you give us a couple, like, here's some tools to get you started, to practice empathy?
Yeah, I think part of it is just cultivating curiosity about other people.
Mm.
When we find people who are different than us, ask questions
Yep.
with love. Don't be rude, and don't assume that you have the right answers. But ask questions. Learn about their story. Why are people the way that they are? There's almost always something deeper than what's just on the surface. I think also, it might sound silly and trite, but I think it matters. Read novels and read books by authors who are different than you, who have different religious or ethnic or cultural backgrounds than you do. Just expand your idea of what the world can be, and what goodness in the world can look like. And I think, just I was thinking about, what are ways that we need empathy in like our regular life, not in the hard stuff, but like the kind of silly stuff, like when we're in traffic and somebody cuts us off. In my family, we have this practice of telling stories about other people, and so what if our practice of storytelling is, what, I bet that car who just cut me off in traffic, I bet they're late to pick up their kids, and you know what, I'd be cutting people off if I was late too, because I don't want to get charged the late fee for being late to preschool. Right, like, it's silly, but it changes the way we see the world, right? Because then it's somebody who's human, somebody who's a parent, somebody who loves other people, who's acting in the world in a way that we might too. And then it takes away the anger, and it takes away the judgment. And I think, the more that we can see people as humans and as people who are just like us, and in the way that we have pressures and obligations and loves and joys, I think the more that it allows space in our life for empathy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so true, and I appreciate you talking about, not just the hard things, but
Yeah,
just those little things, and because that's where we live our lives, and empathy is something that I think we can practice, and no matter what the circumstances, and I think too, especially like in our culture right now that is so divided and so polarized. Yeah, I just love you bringing up, read different perspectives and people from different cultural, ethnic backgrounds to just, help expand your worldview a little bit.
yeah,
And I think, it's really easy to hate somebody from a distance.
yes,
You can throw a punch when you're a couple feet away from somebody, but you can't punch somebody when you're hugging and embracing them. It's hard to, and that's sort of what empathy and compassion kind of looks like. If there was a physical expression of it, it's embrace, and as you're
that's
saying,
right.
like sitting next to and just wrapping your arms around in love. Yeah, I think that's such a good word for what we need to hear right now. Yeah. Well, hey, thank you for taking the time and
Yeah,
sharing some of your awesome wisdom with us. It's good. I mean, there's so much here that we could dig into, and hey, maybe we will sometime in the future. We'll get into this a little bit more, but thanks for sharing just a couple
absolutely,
thoughts on it. Yeah. All righty. Well, thank you, Jennifer.
absolutely.
All right. We'll see you soon.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye. So that was Jennifer Potterbuff, just a great friend and just a great model of faith for me personally. I mean, whenever we sit down and talk, I'm honored to call her a friend, but whenever we sit down and talk, I always feel like I learn something, and she always challenges me to grow and deepen my faith. And so I'm grateful for our conversation. I hope that you gain something from it. And I hope throughout this week that you'll find ways to practice empathy. in maybe some of those small ways, maybe some of those big ways, and just begin to expand your worldview, but also see it as expanding your heart to meet the heart and the mind of Jesus. So I hope everyone has a great week, and hey, I'll see you for worship at 9:30 or 11 o'clock. Take care.